Welcome! How's everybody doing? Apologies for the small delay there. I had some trouble posting on r/breadtube more than I expected. Had a good day? Mine has been a little bit of a slog. I had a long interview yesterday, and I have another interview on Monday, and I'm really not looking forward to it because I don't want the job, but you can't really turn down interviews when you don't have a job, right? I also haven't eaten too well today, which is not helping, Amen, Cam says. At least we're in a similar boat, if nothing else. I had some broccoli, and, I should have taken one of my girlfriend's roommate works at a coffee shop, and so she comes home with all of these leftover sandwiches, and big cookies and stuff, and I should have grabbed one of those on my way out, but I didn't. Thank you, Kirzan. I kind of hope I do horribly in it. The one that I really hope I killed was the one yesterday, because that was with a class actions firm that helps people reclaim their money when corporations screw them. Welcome, Lucy. And so that would be a good job to get. But the one that's on Monday is with basically a bank, a small business loan bank, and I'd work in their legal department, and I would hate it. So those are the two things that I have a good chance at getting offered right now, and I have no idea how well I did on Friday. It was a 3-hour-long interview, an hour away from where I lived, and it was freezing in Boston this week. And so it was just kind of horrible. I majored in English and political science with a minor in philosophy, though I kind of have a weird amalgamation of experiences. I'm trying to be a lawyer eventually, which is why I'm looking for paralegal jobs. Whew. Well, hopefully I'll be able to get one of those, and even though I won't be able to stream as often, I'll be able to stop asking you all for support and do a little bit more investment and eat food that I want to eat. If you don't know, I have an unhealthy penchant for drinking fruit juice and lemonade, and so if I have a steady income, I might spend half of it buying fruit juice because I can't control myself. It's like a champagne socialist, except it's a orange peach mango juice socialist. That's what I am. All right, well, with that said, we can start chatting about some news. My plan, I've done a few of these before, but they're normally not very well attended streams. So we'll see if we can make this one a little bit more exciting. Normally what I do is I just go to Google News and I scroll through, and I'll talk about things that stick out to me, both nationally and internationally. But also, I would love it if people would talk about things that they want to hear about in the news, so I don't have to think about it and I can spend some more time covering those. It's going to be a little bit more of a relaxed and slow stream tonight. Let me turn up the music a little bit, because I'm going to have to run to see my girlfriend's friend who's traveling to visit her in just about an hour. And so I'm going to be leaving a little bit early, and I'm going to try to be taking it a little bit slower and a more relaxed pace in between. That's the plan. Bloomberg thinking you're running for 2020, that's what you're going to start me with? Oh boy. Well, I guess I did ask for suggestions. I mean, I guess I can talk about that. It's not a super hard thing. I appreciate the suggestion. So the whole premise with Bloomberg running, that in news, where's the news? Yeah, Jeff Bezos asked Mike Bloomberg, I guess, if he'd consider running for president. I'm interested if I can see one of the initial breaking news articles about it. Fucking opinion, run, Mike, run. Jesus Christ. You're from New York? I'm so sorry. One of my closest friends goes to Columbia. He's not like the other Columbia bros. He is a socialist. Actually, is a follower on the stream, though he never shows up, because what time does somebody going to Columbia for comp sci have for watching live streams? You had to argue that de Blasio was going to be a failure to my dad when he announced he had a 0%. I had to do the same for Bloomberg. Yeah. See, that's the thing. So, like, this is... I'm not even going to read this article. I can't. But the argument here, the run Mike run, Jeff Bezos wanting Mike Bloomberg to run this screenshot that was on Chapo Trap House where it's like Bloomberg net worth versus Trump. This is Trump. Am I gonna be able to pull it up? Yeah, this fucking screenshot. All of this stems from this like same liberal premise that... Why is this so zoomed? Blump owned. The same liberal premise that a person's success in capitalist markets relates to their acumen for public policy, reflects their worth as a human being, and should even be considered when somebody's running for president. And so, like, this run Mike run thing, this is about between a maker and a faker, and it's describing Bloomberg as a maker. And so it's this idea that people like Bloomberg are billionaires because they worked really hard at it, and they deserved it. And let me pull this up. Can I not? I don't want to sign up. I just want to search. Let me see if I can get it. Comics. Existential Comics, who follows me, by the way. Isn't that really fucking cool that I'm one of the 300 people Existential Comics follows? Did this great tweet thread about how the various billionaires didn't earn their wealth. There we go. Bill Gates made his money by extinguishing free software and forcing us to pay him a tax just to turn our computers on. This was only possible because the state was ready to violently enforce his quote-unquote intellectual property. He didn't create a computer revolution, he destroyed one. And this is pretty much universally true for billionaires. This is the only way you can make $1 billion, is by taking advantage of some part of daily life that already exists and managing to exploit it for money in a way that almost always has to hurt people. So the easiest example would be you own a ton of factories and you pay your laborers less than the value they produce. And you take their excess value, and that's what makes you a billionaire, and you're able to exponentially increase that. But some of the more harmful and, I guess, harder to point out examples are things like what Bezos and Bill Gates did, Zuckerberg, where they don't come up with a new idea. They just figure out a way to extort the market using the state. Lenin would have a lot to say about this in State and Revolution. And so this whole premise that is used here, that's like Bloomberg is a maker, is completely bullshit. Bloomberg is not a maker. Bloomberg is a billionaire, and the billions of dollars that he earned did not come through his personal hard work. Now, there are cases where some people who are like 100 millionaires just stumbled across an idea that ended up being good. For example, Jared Polis in Colorado. He was the congressman I worked for, actually. He was the wealthiest person in Congress. Didn't pay his interns, but he was the wealthiest person in Congress. And even though he did a lot of shitty things, to his credit, he emphasized employee ownership in his company where he could. And pretty much the way he ended up making that money was he just happened to make a PayPal-like website at the time that PayPal exploded. And you can talk about how like harmful that is, but the difference between somebody like that and a billionaire is that the billionaire uses that chance discovery to extort the entire market, as opposed to somebody like Jared Polis, who basically just keeps the albeit unjust but existing piece of the pie that they're being cut out from something they're no longer working on, and uses that as passive income. And so the only way you can become a Bloomberg is by not making things, is by funneling the money you do make repeatedly back into forcing the market to give you more and more and more and more, basically extorting the public sector. Kirzan says that blends perfectly with the fact that I always run into problems arguing with billionaire philanthropy. If we increase taxes, Africa wouldn't have malaria nets or some bullshit. Yeah, I see those arguments all the time, Kirzan. And it's like, this is the way that I've phrased it. I want to pull up my Twitter, but I'm trying to be a little bit more sly with my identity, and my normal Chrome has a default desktop of... I guess I'll have to pull it up as a third party. Default desktop of me and Kayla, and so my face is released. Lads will lead, in other words, Craigslist greater than Amazon. Yes, but both of them are shitty. Let me pull up Maddie B. Rad. Somebody was saying on Existential Comics, maybe I'll just have to go back to existential comics, I guess. On that same tweet thread, somebody was saying that Bill Gates deserves their money, and I don't know if it was the exact same one, so I might not be able to find it. But I replied by saying to the person who was like, I trust Bill Gates to use his money to help people more than I trust the federal government to. And my reply is just, how is that different from monarchism? Because it's not. Like, any argument you can make for the fact that philanthropy is a good thing, and Bill Gates having billions of dollars allows him to do a lot of good in the world by virtue of how much power he has, could be used, and was used to defend the monarchy and say that the reason we should have a king is because if we didn't have a king, then we wouldn't have someone with all of the power to be generous. It's an absurd argument, and the only way you can make that argument is if you don't really value democracy, which is what really all of this is. So this is often said on the left, and I'm just going to restate it. There's an inherent contradiction in liberal capitalism between the stated Enlightenment ideal of equality and democracy, ideals of equality and democracy, and the capitalist market, which creates hierarchies. Hierarchies like the net worth of two different individuals, but more accurately like whether or not you're a worker or a capitalist. And these two things cannot coexist. If you really believe in democracy, you cannot believe that even like the hardest worker in the world should get to be put in a position of power above somebody else who didn't vote for them. Like, that's anti-democratic. And if you believe in capitalism, you can't genuinely believe that people should be able to vote for somebody to be in a hierarchy above them, because you believe that the market should decide that there's some kind of natural hierarchy that the market uncovers. And so when we see things like this in the news, when Mike Bloomberg announces he's running for president and people get super excited about it and Jeff Bezos asks him to run and all of this stuff, you see laid bare in the mainstream media that they don't really believe in democracy. What they really believe in is capitalist hierarchies, and they just think that liberal democracy should reflect that, keep all of the trappings of being a democracy without having to actually live up to its democratic claims. Which I guess, are you satisfied with that discussion, Kirzan? I don't want to move on too quickly, but I think this is a good transition point into talking about I'll just do Bolivia, Telesur. Talking about Bolivia, because all the time right now in America, this is why I use Telesur, which is, to be fair, Venezuelan state media, so it needs to be read accordingly. But American media is completely biased on Bolivia. A great example of that was this claim in Al Jazeera, which isn't even that Western. Al Jazeera News argued that claimed that the reason Evo Morales was able to win a longer term limit, remove the term limits from the Constitution, was because he argued that term limits violated his human rights, and the Supreme Court of Bolivia sided with him. The actual reason, I've said this before on stream, so I apologize, but the actual reason that the Supreme Court eliminated term limits is because the referendum to decide term limits and whether or not there should be term limits was determined to have had too much foreign interference to be legitimate, and so its result was overturned. And that in Bolivian law, to punish people who interfere in elections, when you overturn an election, it automatically goes to the opposition result. And so, Western media is just lying about this, and they're saying things like Morales is a dictator, Bolivia is living under a tyrant. Evo Morales has been elected. He's won every election that he has run for a national office. And even the most recent one that's controversial, there was little doubt that he would have taken the election in the end. The election night, he was a few percentage points behind, and indigenous people, which are the slowest to vote, it's harder to count theirs, vote vast majority for Evo. And so it was it was not controversial for him to say that he had won the 40% he needed to avoid a runoff, because that would be a 10% more than his next opposition, which is how they decide whether or not to do a runoff in Bolivian law. That was not a controversial statement, but the opposition turned it into one and did everything in their power to make the election results look illegitimate, and people are calling him a tyrant. Well, nobody ever calls Jeff Bezos a tyrant, and objectively, Jeff Bezos controls his workers' lives, and they have no democratic mechanisms to respond to him. Sorry, Kirzan, would you say term limits are undemocratic? So I am mixed on term limits. I think that for an executive office, there should be a term limit. However, I can see why in states like Bolivia and Venezuela and Cuba, it is much more difficult to allow there to be term limits, because every time, basically, when more candidates are running, when there isn't an incumbent in office, it is very easy for international imperialists to drastically change the result of the election by putting in their own spoiler candidates, by funding people, so on and so forth. And so, like, in an ideal world, I would say that there should be term limits for executive offices. However, I understand the argument for why there shouldn't be here. I honestly don't know where I would fall if I were in Bolivia, whether or not I would support term limits. But what I do know is that the question on hand right now is whether or not we should support Evo Morales, who is a leftist, as a socialist who has done significant good for Bolivia. I did a whole stream on it that's up on YouTube that you can watch. Whether we should support him or we should support his fundamentalist religious opponent, who is sponsored by the United States, the person leading the opposition protests. And that's not much of a question for me. And this is all, like, I hate when people say whataboutism, because that's what people would accuse me of here. So I'll address that in a second, I guess. But it's hilarious to me when people say things like eliminating term limits and running for office and winning popular re-election again is anti-democratic. When in the United States, people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos control the lives of hundreds of thousands of workers. I'm sorry, Lucy. I don't know why, but my stream doesn't do well in Germany. People can't watch it, I guess. It doesn't transfer well. That's a shame. When people like Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates can control the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, the Walton family controls millions of workers without any democratic mechanisms. And so you're going to say that some other third world country is tyrannical when this happens in our own country, A. And B, like, Bolivia's democracy is very young compared to the United States. And if you look at how the U.S. democracy was doing this early on into its democratic career, I guess you could say, the U.S. still had repression of women's votes. Women couldn't vote at all. There were huge political machines. Black people had only recently been able to vote. Like, U.S. democracy, for most of the period that it was called a democracy, was white landowning males, pretty much. And only until, like, 40 or 50 years ago were there active efforts to reduce civil rights violations in voting. And so states, for even bigger majority of U.S. history than it was just illegal for black people to vote, there were states that made it very difficult to impossible for black people to vote. And so, like, no matter what your ideal democracy should look like, it's incredibly hypocritical for the U.S. to accuse Bolivia of not living up to the ideal democracy standard, because we don't live up to it in any extent. And so to use that to justify supporting a fascist opposition who would make it even less democratic is obviously in bad faith. I agree. I usually argue that we shouldn't have billionaires for the same reason. We have term limits on presidential power. That's why I asked about Evo. Yeah, I mean, I think the argument against billionaires is even more convincing, because in order to maintain office, you have to be reelected every couple of years, and you are directly accountable to the people, and there are a lot of mechanisms to check your power. If you're a billionaire, nobody has to vote for you ever. You can literally be born to a rich family and be given billions of dollars and suddenly have that much power over other people. There is no democratic mechanism for people to take you out of power. And in fact, because billions of dollars is so much money, you can pretty much use it to extort the state and control it for anything you need. Lucy says, please remind me that I wanted to ask you something after the stream. Yeah, I'll try to remind you. I thought the internet in Germany was really good. I'm not sure. That's fine. Doesn't need to be Discord. I'll remind you. I'll reach out. So that's what's been in the news recently. It just, this post came up where basically some conservatives in America were saying that it's great news that, and it was on Reddit. It was upvoted highly on Reddit. It's great news that the police allied with Evo Morales' opposition, which A, isn't true. Yeah, so the Christian Democratic Party is one of the oppositions. You can guess what that is. Yeah, it was on Chapo. That's not true. It's only a few police officers in the bigger cities that have large wealthy populations, wider populations, that had the police siding with Morales. And secondly, it's not like Morales is a dictator. He's won multiple elections, and he has much more of a legitimate claim to power than Donald Trump does, or any of the billionaires that are funding Bloomberg's run. And so the thrust of both of these news articles, analyzed in tandem, is that when Bloomberg and Bill Gates and Bezos extort the entire economy and exploit the state system to basically steal billions of dollars from laborers, they are lauded, and it's claimed that they are actually, not only are they not anti-democratic, but they are fit to run for the highest office in the land. And when an indigenous man has the term limits legally overturned through the systems of his court and wins popular re-election after improving the economy of his home state, that is tyrannical dictatorship and is unacceptable, that it should be intervened upon. America, really fucked, guys. The internet in Germany is one of the worst in the EU. Yeah, but that's in the EU. For the record, Lucy, at home, just when I started streaming, you were actually one of the first people to find my streams, which is kind of cool. But back in Colorado, I got 2 megabytes a second download speed. That was it. And that was like on a good day. On most days, it really averaged 700 kilobytes. What are my thoughts on Tulsi? Oh boy, Tulsi Gabbard is weird and fascist, and I don't have very many thoughts beyond that. I think that Tulsi is very telling because her experience with the DNC tells us a lot about how their internal mechanisms force people to align with Hillary Clinton and party leaders over time, and so that's helpful. She is a proto-nationalist, and yeah, she is interested in non-interventionism, basically out of a isolationist policy. She's not a leftist. However, the fact that she is so widely disdained, I think, is really great evidence that the hegemony of liberal imperialist thought in America has not weakened over time, even since 2016. I don't really care about impeachment. Does anybody here really care about impeachment? Because I can talk about it. Jeez, that's rough, Lucy. That is really bad. Well, you are in the more rural area, if I remember correctly. You're not in, like, Berlin. I really don't care about impeachment. So, unless anybody cares about impeachment, I'm just going to move to world news. I guess it's important, but so much of it is just political theater, and I'm not terribly interested in the mechanism by which Trump would be removed from office, because as far as I'm concerned, Trump should have been impeached for withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords, for putting kids in migrant detention, not for any dumb shit he did to win an election. That's just irrelevant to me. Ooh, I haven't heard about this. And what is this? Wow. Lots of stuff. And this is probably going to be some Hindu nationalism. Isn't that great? I was watching Majority Report. Seems like it can be used as electoral fodder. Yeah, I was watching Majority Report too. And I share the concern that Nancy Pelosi is intentionally scheduling it to disrupt Bernie's run. I think that's a fair concern. Oh boy. India's top court allows Hindus to build temple on disputed holy site while promising Muslims land elsewhere for mosque. Oh, welcome, Winter Water Warmth. How you doing? We're just talking about some news. Here's some proto-fascism in India. So, this is concerning and relevant because, basically, in case you didn't know, there was not a really strong Hindu-Islamic conflict in pretty much anywhere in the world, but especially not India. I'm alright. It's going to be a little bit of a shorter stream, unfortunately, and I think my voice is going to start to go in a few minutes, so if it gets gravelly, you'll have to forgive me. There was basically not any real religious tension between Hindu and Islamic regions in the Middle East and India for centuries before the British came. But British Indian colonial policy, let me see if I can pull up any papers on this. Basically, what the British did as their colonial policy generally in every country is they would go there, they would study the culture. This is where anthropology came from. Anthropology as a field was born out of the British Empire, seeking to understand the people it wanted to conquer. They would then codify what they thought were the local rules already, and then put British people on top of a local structure. This differed from a lot of the other imperialist policies. The Spanish were much more accidentally into integration with natives. That's why there's so many more mixed race countries in Latin America, and Hispanic as an identity was born out of that. The British basically sought to exterminate native peoples in North America, but in India they had a different policy. The Russians sought to coexist with native peoples but slowly push them out. But what the British did is they would go into these regions that were far away from them, and if they thought it was sufficiently civilized, they would just try to build a hierarchy where there previously had been a looser one, and then put a British person above it. Kirsten said, "You know of any books that talk about those dynamics and how they differ between the colonial powers?" I will look into it. I can send you a paper that I did on Soviet nationalities policy in Central Asia. I think I've talked about this on stream before, but basically I wrote a semester paper about why Soviet state-building attempts in Central Asia failed, and it talked a lot about Russian colonial policy. I definitely cited something in that talked about the birth of nationalism and how that related to colonial policies. I'll look into that, and I will get back to you. If I forget, remind me, and I'll pull it up in my spare time. Anyway, so what happened in India, just as a specific example of this, is the British came across the Hindu caste system, and they saw it as an opportunity to basically build the same colonial hierarchy they've seen in the past. And so they codified what were basically a very wide variety of inexact Hindu beliefs into a specific set of religious laws that became very heavily enforced. And then they put British people as administrators on top of that caste system. That's how the British Empire ruled the British Raj. And this had a number of impacts, but one of the big ones was that it created a fundamentalist religious sect in Hinduism where there previously had been none. And then the British did the same thing in Pakistan. And then it gets even worse because during the Cold War, there was a strong communist movement in India. The British sought to basically foment Indian nationalism, anti-communist nationalism, which, if you know anything about anti-communist nationalism, it's just fascism. And so that led Indian nationalists, Hindu nationalists, down a route that was pretty much directly opposed to any kind of conciliation between Islam and Hinduism. When, for years and years and years, for centuries, many of the Middle Eastern cities that were like away from the subsistence farming and ranching and herding communities had large Hindu populations of traders and merchants. Like, it was a regional ethnicity, and that was put into danger because the British basically needed to create fundamentalism so they could effectively rule the region and prevent communism from spreading. And so we take this back to here, and the oppression of Kashmir and everything that's happening in India with Indian nationalism. And you can see that, like, India is intentionally suppressing Islamic identities for the sake of building Hindu nationalism, which the main party is Hindu nationalist and is proud of it. And as a result, this is all the result of the British Empire coming in 100 years ago and wanting as much power as possible and to rule as easily as possible without regard to the cultural damage it might do in the future. And something that's really odd that you'll notice that is because of this is, like, there are Indians whose grandfathers starved because of Winston Churchill's policies, grandfathers and great-grandfathers, like, starved to death because of Winston Churchill's decision to intentionally direct wheat away from Bengal. And then these people turn around and are Hindu nationalists who support Churchill. And the reason that is because Churchill is far-right and anti-communist. And they see, for whatever reason, they see Islam as a leftist ideology and want to ascribe to this kind of Churchillish world order where Indians are below white men, but they're above Muslims. And it's really disgusting, and it's a direct result of British imperial policy. Winterwater once says, was watching Majority Report's mention of a new book leaked from inside the White House. I think it's Mike Pence. So many people are going to make bank off of just being in that shitty administration. Want me to tell a real lib story from DC? Any of you interested in hearing about a real DC lib? Because, oh boy, am I ready to tell you about it. You had another idea of what I could stream today? Let me know, Lucy. I'm interested. I like these news streams, but I don't normally get huge viewership on them, and so that's why I'm a little bit slower to do them. By the way, if you're joining the stream for the first time, please feel free to give me a follow. The International will play, and you'll be able to be notified with my future streams. So, when I was in DC, there were initially 4 interns working for this congressman, and 3 of us were leftist. One was a kind of white liberal Bernie supporter. One was this super awesome black guy who was like, he would call cops pigs. He was studying revolutions in school. And then it was me. And I don't need to tell you about my politics. And so some other interns came later who were more liberal, but the 4th intern to join the office after us was this girl who went to CU Boulder. She was a white girl. And like, we would make socialist jokes around her, and you could tell that she was a little bit uncomfortable by them, but she wouldn't say anything about it. And, like, from time to time, we would spar. She once asked me, she once said that if you don't support Biden because he bombed kids, then you must not support any Democrat, and that's kind of the point. But near the end of the time that I'm working there, we are all sitting in this big room having ice cream to, like, thank the interns for their work over the summer. And she mentions that the reason why she's working for Congressman Polis, who, I mean, is lib shitty, but he's one of the most progressive congressmen at the time. She says the reason she's working for Congressman Polis is because the White House rejected her internship application. She wanted to be an intern for Donald Trump. And people in the office were like, what the fuck? And she's like, well, it's somebody in power, you know? And I feel like that's kind of the entire... I think that's everybody who works on Capitol Hill. They're just amazed by the power structures, and they don't actually think critically about who holds power, why, and whether they should. Yes, Democrats are the worst. One of the other interns who came later in the office was a white guy, and he argued that it was okay that America allied with the fascists against socialists because they were trying to win the war of ideologies. And it's like, you just start from the assumption that America is good, and there's nothing you can't justify. Lucy says, you could have streamed about what would happen if Kara Lieberknecht came to power 101 years ago. Your friend worked for Tim Kaine. Why are you still friends with him? Tell me that story, Kirzan. Let's do a little wiki here, just for the sake of it. I really want to know what would have happened if the Spartacist won. Yeah, there you go. That's Carl. Rosa would have been better than Carl, I'll be frank. I mean, both sides sell their proverbial souls to get ahead. LOL. Fuck morals. Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing that really pisses me off, and this isn't related. I'll get back to news in a second. But have you noticed that anytime you ever criticize a liberal, their immediate response is to say that, like, Republicans are worse? And, like, we weren't talking about Republicans, whether or not they're worse. I had yesterday, I tweeted this out, yesterday, a Warren supporter texted me to ask if I would support Warren for president. And I said that I'll read you the exact quote. I was kind of proud of myself. I replied to this person, Warren called Palestinians a quote-unquote demographic threat and defended Israel's bombing of Palestinian schools and hospitals. She also voted twice to fund Trump's military. Find a candidate who doesn't support mass murder. And the person just responded to this with, I appreciate your honesty, advocacy, and conviction to the issues that matter to you. Have a great weekend. Like, Politics isn't a game. If you vote for Warren, you are voting for somebody who has killed people, who has chosen to kill people. And if you have to do like a least evil argument, a harm reduction argument, that would be fine in a year where there weren't people running who have literally sworn off these campaigns that kill human beings. People who are fighting for Palestine to be recognized. And so it's like, I don't understand people who are able to put their moral, because they don't, we'll explore the minds of these people. Sorry, you thought it was a car beeping, Lucy, I apologize. Let's put ourselves into the minds of these people in DC for a moment. Winter, water, warmth. They don't think that they don't have morals. What they think is that their morals are just being put off. Like, in the future, we're going to be able to win everything that we want, but for now, we have to compromise, and that's just the way it is, and yeah, it kind of sucks, but we're better than those progressives who never compromise and they never get anything done. And so they wake up in the morning and they approve bombing campaigns to kill innocent people, and they side with Israel against Palestinians. And then they go to bed at night thinking, man, I can't wait until we eventually have enough power to actually do good things. The problem is that that's a self-defeating ideology. By compromising, you are proving to the other side that you are never going to actually fight for the things you claim to want. And so why would Republicans ever move left? Ever? They're just going to stay where they are, because every time that somebody dies, they win. And people on the left, unless they fight back as aggressively as they can with the morals they actually hold, all they're going to be doing is capitulating to fascists every step along the way. It's really insane to me, and I had to deal with a lot of people like that in DC, and I suspect I'll have to deal with a lot of people like that for the rest of my life. But yeah, Kierzan puts it excellently. Ends justify the means, but they never reach the ends. Let's see. I feel like I've been radicalizing him more. We went to college in VA, and he's a Virginia native. He started before the 2016 election. He jumped ship recently to a nurse. She's Libby, but better than Tim Kaine, a former nurse, now congresswoman. Okay, I mean, yeah. Keep radicalizing those friends. That's all we can do. That's the way we fight the fight. So, the protests in Iraq. Here's another consequence of imperialism. Can I not read this? This is so frustrating. There we go. Why? Okay. Anti-government protests, according to the High Commission for Human Rights of Iraq. So, this really rings to me similarly to what happened in the first Iranian Revolution. Basically, if you don't know, the reason why Iran is now run by fundamentalist Islam is because, I can't find the previous one, is because there was a earlier revolution against, there it is, is it called the White Revolution? No, it's this. Okay, sorry. I'm just making sure I have my story right. So basically, in Iran, the people rose up against a U.S. and British oil company that controlled the oil reserves of Iran. And they said that we should control these natural resources. And so I think it was actually through an election. After the Shah resigned, they elected a socialist, wasn't even really a socialist, it was more of a social democrat, who started, it was Muhammad, let me pull him up, who started redistributing resources and basically reclaiming land from the Anglo-Persian oil company. As a result of this, the CIA couped him and took him out of power completely, basically destroying the left in Iran completely. And so the only wing that existed in Iran that was opposed to imperialism still, which was a very widely popular opinion in Iran, was the fundamentalist religious people. And the only place that you could organize, just in a very materialist sense, the only place you could organize in Iran for revolution was inside of mosques with mullahs. And so the ultra-religious, ultra-fundamentalist, basically fascist Iranian party took power because the West destroyed the left, and the left was the only alternative. And so it was socialism or barbarism. And barbarism was the one that was able to finally throw off the yoke of the United States, but obviously it's fucked. And so, like, there was never going to be a middle ground. It was always going to be either socialism or barbarism. And the US, even though they normally choose barbarism that benefits their interests, lost in the end, but so did the people of Iran. And to this day, the U.S. is trying to use the fact that this is a fascist government to take the current government of Iran out of power, to coup them, to invade. And the thing is that if they're put back into power, the first thing the U.S. is going to do is reform this oil company and restart the whole process. And so you want to talk about, like, Iraq, what they're protesting right now is against the IMF. And I hope that this wins, this protest against international markets exploiting the natural resources of Iraq, and the U.S. having never really suffered from the fact that it irradiated huge swaths of Iraqi land and killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. I hope that this succeeds. But a real danger that I'm terrified of, if we don't win elections in the U.S. to prevent this from happening, is that there's going to be a successful transition of government towards the left, and then the West is going to, the global North really, is going to take these people out of power, and all that's going to be left to resist the West is going to be fundamentalist religious people. And the same thing that happened to Iran is going to happen to Iraq. And world tensions continue to rise and the people suffer. It's incredibly frustrating. I vote with my morals, but the issue is most of the time no candidate will ever be good enough for me to vote for without feeling like I'm settling or compromising. The closest I can think of is Bernie. Yeah, I mean, Winter, it's not about voting, like... So when you are doing harm reduction, when you're voting with your morals, you vote as far left as you can, basically, and that's what I do, too. And it's not as far left as you wish it were, but you vote as far left. Oh, no. Well... Let's skip this Geico ad. Once you've voted, the real question is whether or not you are doing praxis, taking steps in activism to bring a party that's genuinely left into power, or to change local policies towards leftism. Like, those are the things that actually matter when it comes to living your morals. And what I find is that these people in DC who are legislative aides and staffers, they have the power to push the party left. Like, they have that ability. It's within their purview, even as a job, to think about policies and propose them to their congressmen. But they basically choose not to, because they don't worry about, is this policy correct? Is this going to improve the world? Is it going to help people? What they worry about is it possible to do this? And the inevitable result of that ideology is slowly capitulating to the right until there's nothing left to capitulate because the right just won. And it's frustrating. It's frustrating to see. But you're right. It's hard to, like, conceptualize not compromising your morals when every 4 years we're forced to go to the polls and vote for people. So even though I'm in Boston right now, I still vote in the Colorado elections because that's where I'm still registered. I have to change my registration within a year, but I wasn't sure if I was going to go home or not. Sorry, I dropped my phone. So, in Colorado, my governor is a Democrat who's a progressive, the closest person to representing me. But one of my senators is a conservative, Cory Gardner. The other senator is a shitlib, Michael Bennet. My representative is the furthest right, one of the furthest right Republicans in the House, represents Colorado Springs, which is super conservative, Doug Lamborn. And then all three of my county commissioners at large are Republicans. I can't vote in the city election, so I'm not represented there. And so I'm a socialist living in this area. And literally my representation in government can be summed up as a governor sometimes and a senator sometimes. Which is why proportional representation is the only way we should build our governments. It doesn't make any sense to me that we should have this system where we give land votes and divide people by counties. You should maybe do some combination of the two, where half of the House is decided by people electing representatives from their area, or even like 60%, but then 40% should just be assigned proportionally according to how many people voted for a certain political party, which is kind of how parliamentary systems sometimes do it. That's just my current feeling. I might change my mind. Angela Merkel is the one warning us that democracy isn't self-evident. Fortunately, Angela Merkel, you've done everything in your power over the last decade to undermine democracy in every poor European state you could. And so you don't have to tell us about democracy being not self-evident, because you've done an excellent job of demonstrating that. Lucy, do you have any thoughts on Merkel that you want to share with the class? I'm curious. Ooh, I am so hungry. I'm gonna make a bunch of chicken for dinner, and I'm gonna bake some bread. It's gonna be cheap bread because I don't have a yeast, but it's gonna be good bread. I'm just gonna eat the fuck out of it. That's what I'm gonna do. And you can't stop me, chat. You can't. No matter how hard you try, you can't stop me. John Bolton says he could help the impeachment inquiry, but wants a court to make him. You know, and this has been said before, but the one good thing about having Donald Trump as president is how much he roasted John Bolton. Fucking warmonger. Ooh, this is a good one. Faz shared it. Let me see if I can pull it up. Do you think we would have had such push left if Donald Trump wasn't elected? That's a hard question. I don't think we would have. But we don't have to really discuss the moral value of things that happened. They just happened. I never want to say that it's a good thing that Trump was elected because he hurt a lot of people. And so, I don't feel a need to put a moral value on it. And even if I did, I'm not convinced that it would be a straightforward moral valuation. Where is it? Faz posted this great link. There we go. This is about Barr and how Barr is a fascist. Let me pull this down. Yeah, I decoded what you were saying here, Zan, but thank you for restating it. This is just a really great post. People really underestimate how religious Barr is. Everyone assumes he's in it for himself or the party, since he's best known for his work as a fixer during the Bush era, and he's been actively assisting Trump with his criminality. But there's a very strong case that he wants to use the executive branch to basically enforce a fundamentalist religious fascism on the United States. And that's concerning, and these are the people that are in power in Trump's administration. And so when I see people like Bolton saying that he can turn on Trump, it's just a world of evils. There's nobody good in this entire debate. There's no good side. It's just all bad sides. Can be found on YouTube. And sorry, I just want to tell Taylor that I miss him. Yeah, I voted for Jagmeet Singh in the Canadian election, and the NDP is the most left party we have, but unfortunately Canada isn't ready for that, seeing how the Liberals won a minority government with a Conservative follow-up. Yeah. You have to build a movement. That's all we can do, right? It's frustrating. Here's a great way to talk about it. Lenin, when he was in his youth, said, we will never see a revolution in our lifetime. He was basically, he had lived through the failed revolutions of the late 19th century, and was, I can't find the quote, was basically very pessimistic about the probability of a revolution. And at one point he wrote to a friend in a letter, I doubt that we'll see a revolution in our lifetime, or even something stronger than that, we won't. But then the historical circumstances aligned. Imperial powers made mistakes. They put Lenin in a position to take over. and a revolution happened nevertheless. That does not mean that revolution is inevitable, but what it does mean is that the kind of work that Lenin did, the kind of work we're doing, is important to keep doing regardless of the likelihood that a revolution can succeed. Welcome, Pug. We're just talking some news. You're joining just as I'm about to have to pack it up and go make dinner. But I appreciate you joining at all. It's really hard to look at the world and see the opportunities for revolution, especially after you lose elections. But building parties, building relationships with people, helping local unions, feeding the poor, doing what you can basically to create solidarity before a revolutionary circumstance arises is all we can do to create those revolutionary circumstances, to push ourselves into a position that once they appear, whether by our own doing or by a happenstance, we can take advantage of them. This is terrifying to me, so I can tell a story here. I don't know when the ASMR stream will be, Pug, unless there's some huge popular demand. Though I do know that, let's switch it over, if I get a few more followers, I can do a Marxist analysis of Little Shop of Horrors. So get your friends to follow me, and we'll see what we can do. Maybe that could be my 150 follower goal, Pug. Thanks for hosting me. I don't even have an image for that. I don't expect it to happen is all. I appreciate this. Oh, thank you, Kirzan. I really appreciate that. Wow. So much support in the stream tonight, and it's going to be a slow one, so I kind of feel bad about it, but let's switch back. So when I was in high school, my freshman year of high school, there was a, which the shop before is the film, Faz's idea. I know the play, but we're going to do the film, the musical, I should say. The summer before my freshman year of high school, there was a wildfire in Colorado called the Waldo Canyon Fire. It burned down about 400 homes in total, and the only 2 victims of the wildfire were an elderly disabled couple that couldn't evacuate. The following summer, there was another wildfire in the opposite side of town that burned down 300 some homes. And once again, the only victims were disabled people. And then across California and then the East Coast, Cam says we do have the advantage of the internet to organize today. We stand a better chance, I hope. Yes, but there's actually a lot of discussion in the social science community, at least among academics, about whether or not internet thwarts or promotes activism, because I think there's a lot of people who think that the internet alone suffices as their activism and then don't go out and do more, and that's concerning. And so it's an open question, but I do hope that it is a tool that is used to bring revolutions forward. I absolutely agree. In California, there were a series of wildfires. There have been wildfires in California every year for like ever. But people have suffered hugely. There are people who died, and the kinds of deaths that you die in a wildfire, I mean, I know this is dark, but they're not like the rapture. They're not like you just snap out of existence. And it sounds weird, but honestly, when we think about climate change and the damage climate change is going to do, it's almost like we talk about it as if people are just going to be Thanos snapped away. Like we say that 3 billion climate refugees by the year 2100 or something, or however many people are going to die for lack of water. And we just think about like half of Earth's population disappearing. We don't consider it. But these kinds of stories haunt me, because the way that people are going to suffer and die because of climate change, the ways they're going to suffer and die aren't going to be instant. It's not going to be somebody you don't know ceasing to be a number on a screen. It's going to be real people suffering, breathing in smoke, burning alive, drowning. And people who love them, knowing that and hearing that. And that's what climate change is going to do. And I guess that's a sad last story to cover, but it's one that's important to cover, because this is what we're fighting as leftists, whether we use our organizational tools to bring people together online or in person, or we host streams so that we can help people argue better or donate to causes we care about, win elected offices, all of that. We are fighting against people dying and suffering. And it only serves fascists to lose track of that, to let the imagination that death is something that just happens in an instant continue. Winter says, I've been told many times that I'm a tool. They never tell me what I'm a tool of. I don't understand that reference, but I'm sure it's humorous. All right, comrades. Well, we have 3 minutes left of the stream. Any last questions, parting thoughts, things you want to chat about? I can go a little bit over, but I do want to get going and get food in my stomach. I'm sorry that I'm weak and need to eat food to survive. Thank you, Cam. I appreciate that. Perhaps the stream sometime on food. Yeah, I mean, there's this great organization. Probably they're in your city too, so you should look it up. Yeah, everything's political, but food is political too, Cam. Conquest of bread, am I right? There's this great organization in Boston and probably in your city too. You should look them up. Called Food Not Bombs, and they literally just go to parks, public parks, and hand out food, mostly to homeless people, but to anybody who wants it. And it's great. It's a great organization, and it's a leftist. It's like anarchists doing it mostly. So I absolutely recommend it. Your city doesn't have that? Well, you can start it, Pug. Be the change you want to see in the world. Well, with that happier note, food is political, some sad Indiana gang. I mean, we have people all over. We have Mississippi King people in Tennessee. You know, if they can figure out praxis, so can you, Pug. With all of that said, I hope that all of you enjoyed the stream with me tonight, talking about the news. I hope you keep the lessons we learned in mind as you proceed through the week and start conversations where you can with people. Change hearts, change minds. If you enjoyed the stream, please consider following me. You can read more of the things that I write in my Medium below. You can follow me on Twitter. If you really care, you can donate to me through Patreon or follow me subscribe to me on Twitch. I also have a Discord, and we have lots of good memes there. With all of that said, thank you so much, everybody who joined me tonight. It was a really wonderful stream, and I hope that your dinner is as delicious as mine will be. Bye-bye, comrades.